We have some natural fears that are built into us. Some have fear of heights, even if they live in the plains. Some people have fear of snakes, even if they live in New York City. It seems to be certain fears are born into us. Well, horses as well. So dark spaces, predatory animals are built-in fears. This little girl, she's out at the end of the diving board here. Boy, she just looks eager to learn to swim. Now, I could let her walk out to the end of the board and look off and walk out there, dangle her feet in the water, eventually jump off. Feet first. Right? She may be swimming like a fish in a week. Right? She's down-regulated lots of those fears, curiosities kicked in, she's been dopamine reinforced. This is great. Or I can go the old-fashioned way and say, here, learn to swim. Grab her by the scruff of the neck, throw her out in the deep end, let her suck in a bunch of water, splash around, and if she floats, well, she's learned to swim. I may have traumatized her so much that even the idea of putting on her bathing suit is a cause of stress. Well, we can actually up and down regulate brains. I'll show you how this works. Let's say I'm going to saddle my horse for the first time. And I go out there and I introduce the saddle and they're curious and they sniff it and rub their vibrissae, we'll talk about those, on the saddle. And, I put the saddle next to them and then, maybe I just put it on, take it off real quick so they know it's coming off. But eventually I get them used to the saddle and holy mackerel, they're walking around with the saddle on. What I've in essence done is down-regulated. So these are receptors. And let's say this is adrenaline. So I have lots of receptors. So adrenaline can fit into all these receptors at any point in time. But as I keep this process going, right, of becoming acclimated, these receptors fall off. And now I've only got 2. So no matter how much adrenaline I have here, I can only put so much through the system. They're not, like Martin has told me, I got horses, I don't know how I would ever get them to panic. They're so comfortable in managing things, they're so down-regulated, I really don't know what it would take to get them to panic. It's the opposite with upregulation. So with upregulation, let's say I go back out there and horse number 2 of that day, and it's the end of the day, so I'm not really paying much attention, I'm not as aware, and I'm talking to my friends, and I don't realize that what I'm actually doing is hooking up the back cinch first, and it's loose, and we're talking, and then all of a sudden my horse moves, and the saddle rolls underneath, and they go to bucking all over the place, and when I finally calm them down enough, I get my saddle back. What's happened is we've upregulated. We have so many receptors, we don't need much adrenaline out there because it's going to find a home. All the adrenaline is going to have a place to impact that horse. So the next day I go out there and I go into the tack room and I get my saddle. I don't have to even step out of the tack room and watch that horse who the saddle went underneath. So I got a real task because my horse was asking me, both of those horses in the whole process were asking me one question. Am I safe? Am I going to be safe? If I let you lick and chew, if I give you time, if I don't just throw this up on you, if I'm careful, I'm answering your question. You're okay. You're going to be okay. You're going to be okay. And the horse will tell me if it's going to be okay. And then we just move to the next step, the next step. But we want to just rush through this whole process. And they're not built that way. They need to know their world is safe. And if we do it, it pays dividends, really. This guy here, he's pretty upregulated. He might have stepped off a rung and sprained his ankle one day. That's spooky stuff. These guys are down-regulated. This is what I'm talking about. Parasympathetic nervous system, sympathetic nervous system. We have panic way up at the top. We actually have an optimal learning period where we're curious and maybe to the point of almost being concerned, but able to come back to curiosity. Self-preservation kicks in, and then we start going this way. The more we can stay with curiosity, the more we kind of raise this ceiling here and make them more comfortable. If we keep horses up here threatened all the time, eventually they'll disassociate, they'll become traumatized. These are rehab horses on this side. We've kept them up there in the sympathetic nervous system so long that they're so stressed that they're not really reacting the same way that other horses do. But what we can do, it's pretty interesting. You keep staying with this curiosity and maybe concern and back off. Now your horse is so trusting that it's not threatened by much. And you've done that. You've helped that horse to downregulate. You helped that horse find a spot where it's safe enough and comfortable enough that they've learned to learn, and they're getting dopamine reinforced for it. It's their neurochemicals. And you run the spigots. You mix the cocktails. Right? Cribbing. Cribbing. Is cribbing a bad behavior? You don't have to answer that. It's hypothetical. Here's what we know about cribbing. Big meta-analysis done across like 20 years of studies. What is cribbing all about? Okay. Research indicates horses exhibiting these behaviors were probably living in an adverse environment. And we'll talk about what an adverse environment is. Findings of these studies have demonstrated how the management of horses can influence their behavior and well-being. Management conditions which impede foraging opportunities, right? So they can't go out and they can't graze. Social contact. These are herd animals, right? Well, I don't want them talking to that one. They'll get in a fight and they'll get hurt. We pay a psychological toll, our horse does, for taking away that social contact. Provision of high concentrate diets. So the food companies tell us that all these sugary grains, well, our horse isn't going to the Olympics. Maybe they are, but let's be real. Right? We want to ride them out on the trail. They don't need this high performance sugary stuff. These things have been related to the risk of cribbing. Okay. Research suggests that dopaminergic pathways may be implicated in the performance of oral stereotypy. The stereotypy is a behavior that doesn't really have a purpose to it. And there's additional evidence to support the hypothesis that gastrointestinal irritation is involved in the crib biting. Okay, these all play out together, and I'll show you how. Hypothetically, how this can happen, and not so hypothetically, because there's now a lot of research to show this bears out. Horses oftentimes are fed like we are. If they're in the wild, they're eating all the time. 17 hours. Just grazing out there, moving along. Nibble here, eat over here, browse off that tree. So movement, that's what they do. They move and they eat. That's what horses do in the wild, largely. So we take away movement, and we say, you're going to fast. You're going to fast because we're serving you breakfast, and then we're going to serve you lunch and dinner. Or maybe we're serving you breakfast and dinner. What horse in the wild takes a voluntary 5-hour fast? Out in the orchard, out in the pasture, when have you ever seen that? So here's what we find happen. Because we know that gastric ulcers are almost 100% man-made. Horses' stomachs carry hydrochloric acid. They are not an on-demand system. Ours are. We eat food, we develop this hydrochloric acid that helps us digest. They have a stomach full of acid all the time because it's designed to deal with all the roughage. So if they don't have constant gut fill, they have acid on the inside of their stomachs burning their stomachs. It's not often that they're all revved up because, it's feeding time, it's dinner time. Oftentimes, it's our stomachs are hurting because we have acid in them and we need to get something in our gut as quick as possible. Now, that's not the only thing that happens. Horses can create a bromide, a buffer. How can they do that? Through saliva. So, horses will bite. And they'll bite on things and create a saliva that helps with that burning acid. So we've taken away movement, and we've imposed this fasting, and now they're creating their own bromide. It's an adaptation. It's a good adaptation. But what happens at the same time is they're creating this bromide that feels better. For some reason, serotonin levels go down. We can't say the horse is depressed, but in a human, if the serotonin levels went down, that's what we'd say. That's depression. And dopamine receptors become highly sensitized. So it becomes highly rewarding. Oh, that feels better. And it becomes an addiction. It's an adaptive addiction. So that horse, it's almost like the autistic child who rocks its head. It's a comforting kind of thing. So here is a good adaptation. The horse is actually doing the best it can in an abnormal situation. We've taken away movement and we're feeding this grain. Grain goes through you like this. They're designed to have tons of roughage because eating hay takes 4 times longer. We're worried about the nutrients that we read on this package from the food company. But that goes right through the horse, where hay, right, takes a while. And there's a social element to eating too. If you turn out a couple of horses, watch them share that flake of hay together. There's a social component that's very comforting to all that as well. So we've taken a horse and we put him in a stall and we've isolated him. And then some people think, oh, it's catching. You know, I don't want that behavior to the other horses to see it. So what I'm going to do? I'm going to isolate that horse from all the others. So I'm going to make it even worse. And they've actually created now a situation that's adaptive. It works. Their cortisol levels come way down when they crib. It works for them. So we're going to put metal braces on their teeth and cause tremendous pain and a lot of other things so that they don't crib because it's such a terrible behavior. It's an adaptation. Who created it? We did. How many horses weave and crib out there in the wild? It's unheard of. They don't do that. Those are stall vices. Vibrissae are sensory organs. They're feelers. So if a horse wants to explore something, it can rub its vibrissae on them. They're strategically located. There's some up here too, in blind spots. So the horse may not catch its lip on the nail in the manger because of its vibrissae. Watch how close they can get to an electric fence with those vibrissae. So horses, when curiosity's kicking in, let them rub that. People say, well, I'm letting them smell my saddle pad. No, you're not. Those olfactory bulbs are huge. It could smell that saddle pad for who knows how long ago. It's rubbing those vibrissae on where it can tell, is it soft? Is it hard? Is it giving off heat? What's going on with this? It's like when we handle things. Electron microscopic picture of a vibrissae. It has its own blood supply. It goes back to a nerve ending. It goes back and registers in the brain. So when we cut off vibrissae, right? Oh, that's a mare. She's not going to look good with a beard, right? So let's shave that off. What we know is that not only does eye trauma and lip trauma increase significantly when you trim off vibrissae because you've taken away their chance to feel, it doesn't hurt because that's a hair follicle that you're cutting. But the hair goes back into the nerve. So when the hair brushes, the nerve fires. That's how it works. But here's what we're finding. What if you keep that shaved all the time? Well, what we're doing is we're depleting that area of the brain with information. So it shrinks because it's getting no information from the outside environment. So after a while, if the vibrissae eventually grow back, they're not going to be as useful as they were if we continue to do that. And now, very optimistically, I can say that a number of countries have jumped on the bandwagon. You might have heard, it's illegal in Germany. It's now illegal in France to trim those vibrissae off. Yay! Yay. Those are feelers. Vibrissae, that's what's getting rubbed up here in that soft muzzle. It's checking it out. Why would we take that away from our horse when it really facilitates curiosity? Here's a seal, and they've blocked off eyesight, blocked off hearing, and they throw a ball into the water, and the vibrissae are so sensitive, it can track the ball through the water off those vibrations. So it's very effective. In fact, the military said, this is a pretty cool system. So they've designed robots with vibrissae. Here's the hair follicle, but it's plastic. And it goes back to a circuit that fires and sends the information back up to show where it is in space. So it's such an incredible, apparatus. And yet we decide we're going to shut it down for what? Cosmetic reasons? Not good. That's Clever Hans. Clever Hans the mathematician. I remember as a kid, and we'd go to the zoo, and we'd see things like this. Right, so a cheetah or a wild cat would be in a small cage. Or we'd see a polar bear. What did they do? The equivalent of weaving. We took away their movement, so they'd pace back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. They never thrived. In fact, reproductive rates went down so low that they used to put in the newspaper if there's a new baby panda, that it was this huge event. But, it's just a natural occurrence, but not in a zoo environment. This is the Minnesota Zoo. So we've recreated a habitat to allow those animals to flourish. Reproduction rates went up, animals started to thrive, they were healthy. So, we're anthropomorphic. So what we went and did is we got a group of horses together and we asked them, how should we keep humans? So this is the Equinomorphic Advisory Council on the care of humans. So these horses got together and said, this is what we should do. All those dark, scary, confined places? Let's knock them down. That'll help those humans out. And you know what? Let's give them plenty to eat and plenty of room to move around. So look at all this great roughage here that they can munch on, and they can walk all these distances. They'll love it. And take those shoes off, right? They'll really appreciate that. And you know what? Let's let their bodies thermoregulate, right? So with all those clothes on, their bodies won't have a chance to adjust to the temperature. So put them out, let's take those clothes off so that they at least get a chance to thermoregulate out in the snow. And let's, snowing, blowing, blizzardy weather, let's take their clothes off so they can do piloerection. What that is that horses have little muscles that attach to hairs, and they can fluff up like a chick in the wintertime. If you don't shave their coats, you'll see them. And they're meant to tolerate the cold. Our species disagree on what's a good weather day. Horses feel most comfortable, what do you think, in temperature?
40 degrees.
What, exactly, about 40 degrees. So when we're feeling chilly and we're putting on a sweater, they're saying, what a great day. They have more trouble dealing with heat, but we worry about them in the wintertime. And you know what? Let's let their vibrissae grow. Right? Boy, but they keep growing. But let's let their vibrissae grow so they have feelers. And we're doing all these great things for them, but they're not thriving. And in fact, I'm worried about this guy here. He hasn't pooped in 3 hours. And we think but that's exactly what we do when we take our human values and we put them on the horse. Horses are healthiest, like in that zoo, where we can put them in their natural habitat. We can't always do that, but we can use that as our model and start to think in those directions. That's a prison cell. I don't care what mahogany, it's how beautiful it is, that's a prison cell. Let's say if we never rode a horse before, and we know a horse is a herd animal and what their natural environment's like. What if you ran a zoo and you said, that's where I'm putting the horse? There would be a public outrage. People say, you're keeping that animal like you used to keep the polar bears that's supposed to run around in a box this big? We create deprivation. We find that horses become nearsighted. Their pupils are horizontal, they're supposed to see the whole horizon. You make changes in their brains when they can't see anything. They're a herd animal. And being in the herd provides safety and security. They get chemicals like oxytocin, which is a feel-good bonding kind of chemical. We take that away from them. That's a prison, isolating them. Then we decide we're going to give them really yummy stuff to eat, right? Well, somebody's feeding this peppermint cookie to their horse. Well, we like it. We're going to shave off those vibrissae. And because I'm chilly, I'm going to put this on. These coats interfere with their natural ability to form their own winter coat. They have thermoregulation. They can tell what the temperature is and the changes in sunlight. And they start at the equinox, right? So they can tell when they should start growing this coat. If we inhibit that, they get all sweaty, they don't grow the same way, and it's impossible for them to work their system because the legs aren't covered and the head's not covered, so it can't really work that into the equation either. But we decide, you know what, if it's good enough for them, let's get designer and let's do the dog too. These are companies that have told you that your horse needs to have this. Go to Montana, go to Canada in February, and you'll see run-in shelters. Are they in them? No. They're out there with the other horses, right? All huddled together, tails to the wind, right? That's the way they're designed. There are horses in Siberia, right, that are doing just fine. But we've bought this whole idea that we have to put all these things on them, and the fanciest stables are creating sometimes the most deprivation of all. That's deprivation. You want to trim back dendrites? Take an animal, don't let them interact with their own species. We used to take rats, and they'd take rats, and they'd put them with other rats, and they'd have a little wheel that they could roll around in a maze, and if you found your way to the end of the maze, you'd get some cheese at the end. So there was some cognitive problem solving to take place. And then they made a habitat with cinder blocks and a light bulb that was on all the time, and isolated these rats, and they fed them. So they fed them breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and so they were getting nutrients. Then after about 6-7 months, they died for medical science's sake, and they looked at the brains. The enriched environment, those brains were big and fat and filled with dendrites. Those in isolation, kept away from other animals and not allowed to move, those brains shrank quickly, and those dendrites were really sparse. So if you keep animals who are herd animals in a certain environment, you potentially can interrupt their potential to be even more. You can trim back those dendrites. Sure, they may go and do exercise. Look, my horse can go from A to B, and they can do B, and they can do exercise C. And you can see that dendritic pattern. But those aren't special forces horses. You know, those are the horses that you take them out of the arena for the first time, and you run them around out on a trail ride, and oh my gosh, you know, they're all over the place about everything because they have no experience. They've numbed out. They become desensitized. And instead of being aware of everything, they're just aware of their environment. So, hopefully, I'm off my soapbox here a little bit. But there are ways that we can work closer and do a better job of recreating them out in nature. Because in an active, healthy brain, this is what dendrites look like. In a deprived brain, where there's less activity and less interaction, that's what those dendrites look like. So, the power's in you, and you can get a big, fat brain in your horse filled with dendrites. Who loves to learn? Keep them emotionally regulated and learn how to have that conversation in horse, because they're going to ask it, am I safe? And think about all the times you got in trouble. You never got in trouble for allowing them enough time to solve problems, right? To let them assimilate information. And you never got in trouble if you said, you know what, let's take a minute. I want you to feel safe. That's never backfired on you. What's backfired on you is they've asked, am I safe? And you said, I don't have time to answer that question. Then you're already down the path of the sympathetic nervous system. Whew. All right, a lot of information. If your head's buzzing, I'm glad. Thanks.